Okay, Gary.
There we are. Oh, yes.
Kia ora tātou, and welcome to the People's Republic of Christchurch sub-branch Tuesday Club. I apologise for the traffic that held our charming technical assistant straight from the brewery, so you're drinking his byproduct. Oh no, it's not byproduct.
We bottled the byproduct.
Yes, that's right. I've got a story about that, but I'll tell you later. But welcome, Simon, and thank you for being here tonight and
Being patient.
Being patient, yes. And we do have many things in common. One is that we've both been sacked by NZTA. So at least I got sacked by a less revolting minister, but anyway, won't go there.
Technically wasn't sacked.
You weren't sacked? Yes, of course you were. That's the trouble there.
It's not renewed.
Right, so my name is Simon Kingham. I think I know some of you. I am a professor of geography at the University of Canterbury. I've been here 25 years. Some of my students are here, ex-students and ex-colleagues and various others. But I was, as Gary alluded to, seconded for 6 years to the Ministry of Transport as their Chief Science Advisor. I say Chief, I was the only Science Advisor. And Chief kind of suggests that you've got a team of underlings, but I was the Science Advisor. And my contract, I did 6 years, it was renewed twice, and then it wasn't renewed. And actually I'd already indicated I didn't want them to renew it, because I think it was becoming fairly apparent that my advice was not wanted. So a number of times I offered advice, and they said, no Simon, your advice is not wanted. Literally they actually said that, so that's okay. Anyway. I'm going to try something which is probably wildly ambitious, bearing in mind the demographic of the people in the room. That's a bit rude, isn't it? Can you get your phones out? I never ever say this in a lecture. If you've got a phone, could you get your phones out and type www.menti.com, and then you're going to be prompted for a number, hopefully, if this works, and put in the number 39623333. And then we're going to see what happens. And you're going to ask the question, what 3 words describe, what do you think, or what 3 words do you think describe current government transport priorities? So go to menti.com, MENTI.com. The number is 39623333.
Not dealing with students now, Simon.
I know, I thought this was wildly ambitious, but I've got 3 young people in the front. Younger people.
Come on, you roll this up the bank.
So wildly ambitious, isn't it? But it's fun, right? And in a minute I'm going to go and change the screen, and we're going to see what, hopefully if this works, we're going to see what this
Look at it. Why is there a ghost here?
This is producing a word cloud, so if more of you put the same word in, the word becomes bigger. So speed is quite big at the moment. Cars is quite big. And then we've got motorways fact-free, highways archaic, imbeciles. That's what they comment. Pathetic, frightening, populist, shit. Short to the point.
Well, I'll just shout mine out, Simon. Road toll.
Road toll. Toll is not a good word for it, is it, Glenn? Speed, cars. Auckland. Oh, that's interesting. Yes, I do think sometimes I forget that we're down here. What evidence corruption? Oops. Bogan. Nice. So I'm going to now move off onto what I thought you might like. I was far more polite.
That was good.
It's fun, isn't it? So,
Are you going to do one after the talk about the talk?
3 words describe time.
so I thought that's good first hand talking. I thought roads would turn up, and I thought potholes. Nobody mentioned potholes, or did someone?
Yes, sir.
Potholes, yeah. And I thought speed definitely turned up. And then I thought nobody mentioned efficiency, interestingly, because that's what the minister's thing, he talks about more now, things of efficiency. And then I thought you might mention roads. So that's what I thought you'd do, but you were slightly less polite. I guess one of the things I want to start with is how do we decide? How does a government decide their transport priorities? And I think there's kind of two approaches. One is a thing called predict and provide. I'm going to just talk about that way a bit. And the idea is you model behaviour based on the past. So you say, what's happened in the past? And then based on that, you predict it, what you think will happen in the future, and then you generally provide more of the same to accommodate growth. But what you often do is you make it bigger, stronger, faster, and theoretically more resilient. And I think that's probably fair to say that's what you could, if you were being ingenuous, argue that's what our current government's doing. They're saying, well, everyone uses cars, we've got more people, we've got more roads, we want more places for people to live, we'll provide more of the same. The alternative way that people talk about is a thing called decide and provide. So you actually, rather than predicting what will happen on current trends, you actually say, what would we like to have? What would we like our future to look like? And then you provide the necessary infrastructure to deliver those outcomes. And the question then is the outcomes. Now, the Ministry of Transport still has this thing called the Transport Outcomes Framework. You search, it's still there, they just don't really pay much attention to it. Well, they do, just only one part of it. So the idea is that it says we want a transport system that improves well-being and livability, and it has around that includes safety and prosperity. And I think it's fair to say the current government would say we still have that, but we're only focusing on economic prosperity. That's probably what they haven't got rid of it yet. But the idea is that I think what I'd argue is we're not deciding on our future, we're just modelling based on current trends. And it's kind of what we used to do, and really most people would say we should be doing this. We should say what do we want in the future, and how do we get there, and what do we provide to get there? And I think people would say we're not. I think it's an interesting thing. Does anyone want to have a guess at how much money do you think we spend, or how much does central government spend on transport a year? Anyone want to have a guess? It's a lot. I'll show you the numbers for the last few years. This are the expenditure targets. So this is what they predicted we'd be spending. And this is done through a thing called the GPS. So they do produce this thing called a government policy statement. It's meant to last 5 years, and they update them. So you can see roughly 3 billion a year, and it's sort of gone up. And then the current lot, this is Simeon Brown's one. So Simeon Brown's one goes up dramatically. So the numbers are, we're talking $6 billion a year of government money. So there's a lot of money. And also, what they do in the GPS, the government policy statement, is they subdivide it by categories. So they say, these are the amounts we're going to spend over these periods of time. It's 3 years, isn't it? 3 years rather. And this is how we're going to break it down. And so this is the breakdown by year. So you can see we've got state highways getting the most, and a big jump in state highways in the current one here. Local roads, public transport, walking and cycling, road policing, and other. And it's colour-coded so you can see who was in government at the time. So you've got the different governments. And it's got what they actually spent and what they predicted to spend. I guess one of the keys is if people tell you, occasionally, I don't know if anyone else hears this, but you hear people saying we're spending too much on walking and cycling. Why are we spending so much on cycling? It's quite a small bar, but you can also see that that bar is basically halved in the current government, and I'll talk a bit more about it. If we look at spending in 2024, this is what we've got. Oh, it's gone off the edge of the graph, sorry. Building new state highways has gone off the graph, which is ironic, really. If I tweak it, you can actually see that it hasn't actually quite gone off the graph. It just looks like it has. Oh no, it kind of has, isn't it? It's gone. It's basically we're spending too much on state highways. The graph's not big enough. Walking and cycling improvements gets the grand total of 2% of budget. So if people say we're spending too much, gently point out it's 2%. It's tiny. What we can then look at is we can look at where's that money coming from. You can't see this, but this shows where all the money is coming from and where it's going to. How many of you have heard the argument, car drivers pay for transport? Have you heard that one? Why don't cyclists pay? So just to spell this myth, this is the funding predicted for 24 to 27, so this is this year and the next 2 years. This is Simeon Brown's GPS. Only 42% of it actually comes from road user charges and fuel excise duty. 39% of it is coming from other Crown funding, basically general taxation and other pots of money. 18% from local government and 2% from other tiny things like tolling and legal and properties and stuff. But only 42% is basically user pays. The rest is coming from general taxation. That's what's predicted, because if you looked at that red one I showed you and it had the massive red one, the amount we're spending is going up, the amount of revenue is actually going down slightly. And that's partly a little bit to do with electric vehicles, not only, but it's a little tiny bit to do with that. The point is that car drivers do not overpay, and cyclists still pay. So if you never drive on the road, you're still contributing 58%. You're paying into all those others, or maybe 50%, 56%. So that's kind of a myth that I think somehow we need to change the narrative about. Because you hear it all the time, particularly on social media. We need to keep correcting people and actually say it's coming from general taxation. Transport does not pay for itself anymore. Used to, it doesn't anymore. So if you look what are government priorities, I don't know if you've seen this TVNZ piece. It's about a 20-minute film done by Jill Higgins. I thought it was fantastic. I am biased because I was in it. But I actually think she did a really good. I wasn't in it as much as I'd have liked to have been in it. I wasn't. No, that's not a joke. I wasn't as much in it as much as I thought, based on the amount of time I had to do filming stuff with it, because it took a long time, and there were lots of emails about data. But the point is, she did a really, really good piece about cycle funding. And she interviewed a guy called David Tripp, who's a doctor in Wellington. He was fantastic. A lady called Seko from Auckland, who was fantastic. And she interviewed the minister. I'm not going to show it to you, but it's worth watching, because I've never seen a minister look that uncomfortable. And I will give you some quotes from it about cycling in a minute. But he basically said the number one priority for transport, it's about improving the efficiency of the network. So that's what his basic mantra is. It's about improving the efficiency of the network. So that's kind of what he talks about. One of the things in the run-up to the election that was talked about an enormous amount for something so, in my opinion, I don't want to say utterly insignificant, but something that's really not that significant, is potholes. Lots and lots about potholes. Now, it makes you think that potholes are really important, and yet I assume that we think that there's loads of deaths and serious injuries from potholes, because they were that important. So we can look at the data on that one. This is the data for drugs, alcohol, etc. in fatal crashes. It's the data from 19 to 21. It hasn't changed dramatically. Speed, 30-odd%, drugs and alcohol, 30-odd%, and other things, 44%. So there's an overlap. A lot of cases are drugs and alcohol and speed. So that's one of the biggest groups, it's that combination. So where's potholes? Well, Abilene did some really nice analysis. 1.03%. I don't know if you've heard any other figures, but basically these potholes do not cause death and serious injuries. They're inconveniences and they slow us down. So is there actually a benefit to potholes? And I want to tell you a story about me growing up as a child. It is relevant. So, this is a map, you can't really see it. This is where I lived as a child. I lived just about here. And I'm just going to talk to you about little parts of where I lived. This is, you can see the green line was the road, and they wanted people to go that way, so there was a town over here, and there was a town here, and this is the road that they wanted cars to go on, because this was all residential streets and people living here. There was no destination. They didn't want cars driving through there. This is the way we want it. The problem is, you could cut through that way. That was quicker. Well, no, it wasn't. It was shorter. Or you could cut through that way. And so we needed to do something. The roading people at the time. I was a child, didn't really realise this, but with hindsight, it's very clever. So the first thing they did is, on this bit, they put a little fence. Right? So that, basically, it blocked it and turned those two roads into a cul-de-sac. You could walk through and you could cycle through, but you couldn't drive through. So we blocked here, that was here. My family joke is that my brother was on a three-wheeler and we thought it was very funny to all go through on our normal bikes and block my brother when he was younger. He couldn't get through, and we still tease him to this day. And I think he's still scarred, so sorry Gary, if you do get your three-wheeler. Don't fit through small places. But it did exactly what was intended. It basically quietened those streets that stopped people using that cut through. The other one was this one. Now I'm going to show you a photo there. And what they did is that road was intentionally potholed. It was just a whole road of potholes. Now people living didn't mind because you drove through really slowly. People on bikes didn't mind, you just biked through slowly. People who maintained it didn't mind because it was really cheap. Like the potholes look really posh now. When I was young, they just were potholes. They literally, I don't even know if somebody went through and smashed them to make potholes. But nobody would cut through here because it was so unbelievably slow. So potholes actually served a purpose. Potholes slow us down, right? They're a really good way of slowing us down on certain roads. I'm not going to advocate potholes on State Highway 1. That probably wouldn't go down well. But on some residential streets, potholes might not be such a bad thing because they slow us down. And on my street as a child, that's exactly what I did. I remember it really, really clearly. And nobody used it as a cut through because it was just ridiculously slow. So potholes aren't all bad. That's awesome, yeah.
All can be seized though.
The other thing that's a big priority in the election was roads. And we've got lots of RONs and RAWs, we've now called them. So RONs are roads of national significance, and they've now invented new ones called RAWs, which are roads of regional significance. And I don't know about you, but I'm a geographer, and I don't think that looks very equal. We've only got two RONs, roads of national significance. The other interesting thing is, the one, Mill Road is up here. Many of these were ones that were developed 15 years ago or so, probably further back. Many of them have been in the plan for 30 years probably, Glenn, I think. Yeah, a long time. One of the ones I was involved with when I was in Wellington doing my job there was Mill Road, which is this one. And Mill Road was one that Michael Wood stopped, and he stopped based on tons of science and evidence. It's an absolute disaster of a project. It was bad for emissions and a low benefit cost ratio. It didn't unlock housing. It just did nothing useful. And so Michael Wood, it was probably one of the few major ones he stopped and got rid of. And there was lots of evidence for getting rid of it. It was really clear. Its BCR was quite low. Simeon Brown's new RON is that all the RONs are double lane, dual carriageway. The original RONs for Mill Road was not. It was single carriageway, and it included a cycleway. So if you think that you're going to double carriageway and you're taking, so none of these are allowed a cycleway. He intentionally says no money can be spent out of the roading part of the budget on cycleways. Now my understanding is the only way any of these got benefit cost ratios above 1 is because they had a cycleway on. He stripped the cycleways on, so at some point I'm assuming the benefit cost ratios are going to come out. And unless someone's very creative with the numbers, they should all be below 1. Certainly Mill Road will be way below 1, unless somebody does something very creative with the benefit cost ratios. Because that road was a disaster in terms of, there's no business case to build that one. I don't know about the others, but I did work on Mill Road. But we will see. They've also got the roads of regional significance, so that includes something in Tynwald, something in Wollaston and Hallswell. And now, of course, they've added, I assume included in here is the bridge over Brougham Street, which is one that was cut. So some of you will be familiar with the pedestrian access across Brougham Street, where the school is on one side, the people who go to the school are on the other side, and at the moment they have to cross a pretty dirty road. The other challenge, I think, with Brougham Street, just as a smaller side, is I'm really looking forward to when they have to, by their own rules, put a 30-kilometre speed limit during school hours. They will say you have to have it in urban areas. You have to have a temporary 30k speed limit. So Brougham Street, by their rules, has to have one. I have a horrible feeling it won't, but it should do, right? Why would we disadvantage those children who go to Addington compared to kids who go to other schools? So according to the rules, they have to have one, I think. What's one of the disadvantages of building new roads? Anyone want to tell me?
The more you build roads, the more people travel on them.
The more people travel on them. I don't think some of our politicians get that, so I'm going to just show you one person who does get it, if this is going to work. So I'm going to show you a little video. I'm going to start this video halfway. It's one of the great urban thinkers. And what's happened up till now is they've been talking about the quality of the built environment and the roading near them. So hopefully this is going to work. I think we're going to start about here. We've got no sound, so I need to work out how to get some sound. We need the sound. Can we get in the sound? Let's see.
There's no speakers.
Yeah, you might have to use your laptop speakers.
Yeah, but it's not.
There's no speakers.
Right now, let's see. How am I going to flip this to? I do want to show you. Does anyone know who it is, by the way?
Yeah, Boris Johnson's favourite.
Boris Johnson's favourite.
My niece's favourite.
Settings.
Your HDMI is taking the sound that
Is that?
projector.
Can I change it?
So you can't, because the data projector then would need to have speakers from it, and it doesn't, so it's
Okay.
not work.
So what I'll do is I'll
You can do them.
do the running commentary.
Yeah.
I'll do the running commentary, mate. So unfortunately, it is worth watching. So you search on Peppa Pig. I will do the commentary without the authentic voices. So Peppa Pig is chatting to her family and the tortoise and the fish. And then the builder comes up, the road builder comes up and says, we want to build a road through here. And Peppa Pig says, you can't build the road through here because this is my house. And the builder says, well, what are we going to do? What we'll do, oh, actually, we can do this so you can see it better, and it's going to do it. The commentary. Here we go. We're going to go.
There we go.
Keep going. Here we are, we're going a bit further. And they go, well, we've got to build it because we've got the road, it's a really important road. And so they go, well, we'll build under it. We'll build a tunnel. So the builders are going to build a tunnel. And here they go with the tunnel. So they're going to build from both sides, very clever. It's a bit like when they built the Channel Tunnel. They're drawing from both sides, here they come. Here they go. So they start building a tunnel to go through the hill to avoid demolishing Peppa Pig's house. They're very excited, very fast. Like if they had built the tunnel under Wellington, we may have actually got it. Let's not go there. Very pleased with themselves, and then they open it to great fanfare. They're very happy, very excited. It's like real life, isn't it? Glenn as a traffic engineer. And here they are. Look, there's the mayor come out. I think he's the mayor or someone important to open it. And then all the traffic comes, and everyone's very pleased. Peppa Pig's house is saved. And what happens? It fills up with traffic. And the only person who works it out is Peppa Pig. And Peppa Pig says, but the road's full of traffic because it's induced demand. You build a road, this happens, and the engineers obviously come up with a very good solution. They go, we'll build a bigger road. So if you're watching, that's them all cheering, and the engineer's really happy building a bigger road. And somebody posted this on Facebook, and they said, after Simi Brown announced some of the roads, they said, even Peppa Pig gets it. And the point is, it's not a complicated thing, but I think sometimes our politicians struggle with it. Like, induced demand happens. You build something that makes you get somewhere faster and better, and more people choose to use it. The other thing Gary hinted that I might talk about is speed limits. Obviously, one of their key fundamental policies is increasing the speed limits, so turning around the speed limits implemented by the previous government. So what happened is, under the previous government, NZTA was asked to assess an appropriate speed limit on every road, or I think every road in New Zealand, and they said that the speed limits were unsafe on nearly all of them. I think it was between 85 and 90% of our roads. They said the speed limits are unsafe. As a result of that, the Labour government said, well, we're going to lower the speed limits to the ones that NZTA said were too high. They were not blanket speed limits, reductions, they were targeted. and they all went through public consultation. So when people talk about blanket speed limits, there were no blanket speed limits. Blanket speed limits would have meant every speed limit had gone down. They didn't. They were targeted based on good evidence and science, and they were all consulted upon. Oh, here he is again. When Simeon Brown came in, the minister, he said, we're getting rid of the blanket speed limits. We're going to raise them. Well, there were no blanket speed limits, but he keeps talking about them. I think it's a really good case of if you say it enough, people will believe it. There were no blanket speed limits. They were targeted, they were consulted on. When he did it, basically everybody said this is utter madness. Every scientist said they're madness, every engineer said they're madness, public health people said they're mad, they're wrong. Local councils all said they're wrong. I don't know anyone who knows anything about transport who thinks his policy was a good idea. Does anyone know anyone? Like, I don't know a single scientist or a single traffic engineer, or even a single council. I think even before they were announced, the AA thought they were a good idea to have them lower. Even the truckies said they won't boost freight efficiency. So there's really no one. Then, of course, the Trucking Federation, I think it's Transporting NZ, said they were a good idea. But they didn't seem to have a particularly strong argument for it, because I don't think anyone actually thinks these time savings actually deliver anything. They're kind of fictitious. And then to great fanfare, Simeon Brown had been moved to health, and Chris Bishop came in, which in my opinion is an improvement. I think Chris Bishop seems to understand some of the fundamentals of transport and urban development. I didn't see a lot of evidence that Simeon Brown did. I know some of you will have heard the irony that the place where they announced it was a place where they had a number of fatal road crashes, which I don't think the irony was lost. Well, the irony wasn't lost on a lot of people. I don't think the ministers quite appreciated that. In Auckland, reversing the speed limits which Auckland Council wants, which were consulted on and which were targeted, is going to cost Auckland Transport $25 million. So this is the government that is all about saving money. And efficiency is going to cost something. It's going to cost $25 million to do something people don't want. And it is subject to a judicial review. So a judicial review has been submitted. I think it was submitted at the end of January, saying, Minister, you've done this illegally. You've not gone through the process you were meant to. You've ignored evidence, etc., etc. A number of points, about 6 points for why it should be reversed. And that is that the courts are going to the courts very soon. It's already been submitted.
Who took it?
So there's an organisation called Movement. Darren Woodward, some of you will know. They've submitted it, been submitted by Movement. Yeah. One of the things we've already noticed since the change in minister is that the government has backpedaled on some of them. So they've actually said we're going to go to consultation for some of them that previously they said they weren't going to. So again, I think signs that the new minister is slightly more pragmatic and interested in evidence than his predecessor, who did seem to be based on ideology and promises. One of the things when I was in government, I said to people, what happens when National, what's likely to happen when National get in? And they said what people in government told me, and some of you, I'll be preaching to the, teaching granny to suck eggs or something. Anyway, you'll know this, I didn't know this. They said when people get elected into government, ministers then have the full weight of government, had all the evidence, they have all these policy people, and they often change what they're going to do because they realise that what they promised was silly. And I think most people thought that would happen. It didn't. They carried on with, in my opinion, on this one, silly. What about cycling? So as you can see, the budget went down to 2%, I think about 460 million. And I'll talk about where that's gone in a minute. These are some of the quotes from Simeon Brown straight out of that piece. So these are what he said. He said, we've had a government that's tried to slow people down, take lanes away from cycleways that's clogging up our cities. He actually said on the video that cycleways cause congestion, which is one of the many bizarre things he said. He said, in Auckland, the vast majority of people get around in their cars. Their time is important. It's very much predict and provide. It's also kind of slightly like, what, you mean everyone else's time isn't important? Yeah. Some of you may remember when Roger Sutton was head of Orion. There's a story, I think, a letter in the press, and he was cycling somewhere and someone shouted out, you loser, or your time's rubbish, you're a waster. And he was the guy running and he went on to lead the earthquake recovery, and it's like, don't judge a book by its cover in terms of whose time is important. Somebody around also said, look, I'm sure it would be better for me talking about cycling, but ultimately at the same time I've got to get places quickly and efficiently. Again, not understanding that actually when I came here this evening, I mean, Gary, you mentioned the traffic jams. When I came here in the morning, I thought I just wanted to check the route for me to cycle in. 15 minutes by car, it said 15 minutes by bike. I'm pretty sure it would have taken longer than 15 minutes by car. That's exactly when I came in. So it's way quicker. Another comment I'll come to in a minute. He says, I choose to drive a car, I think this is my favourite one, where I need to go quickly because my time is important. It's worth watching. He looked very uncomfortable when he was saying that one. He looked slightly sweaty as well, which made it even better. When he was asked about the health benefits, and some researchers quoted him about the health benefits of cycling, he said, well, I can go to a gym. And I think it was really interesting because he was then followed by the lady from South Auckland going, people in South Auckland can't afford a gym. And I feel like saying my time is important, I don't have time to go to a gym. That's why I cycle, because it's way more efficient. I know this body looks like it goes to a gym, right? No. This body is just like it is, with far too much eating, but quite a bit of cycling to university. And so one of the beauties of cycling is you get your exercise without actually having to do anything. My personal journey to university takes about 25 minutes. I think it would take about 20 by car. And then I don't have to go to the gym. And I don't have to pay parking or gym membership. And he said, look, there is a place for cycleways. And he said, we're spending 460 million on them. What he didn't say is that all of the money that's allocated for the next 3 years has already basically been spent. It's already allocated for existing projects. The main one is the cycleway between Wellington and I think Petone. And the thing about that cycleway is it's not a cycleway. It's a wall, it's a resilience project, building the sea wall up to protect the railway and the road from being flooded. And somebody put a cycleway on top. And then the guy who decided where the money would come from said, because it's got a cycleway on top, we'll take it out of the cycling budget. So there is no new money for cycling. He might think there is a place for cycleways, but he has allocated literally zero money for cycling. So there's none. And there's also an argument increasingly, I think, that people are saying, why are we wanting to rush everywhere for everything? And there's a really interesting book, I just want to alert you to this book, by Paul Tranter and Rodney Tolley. Paul Tranter is an academic in Australia. Rod Tolley is a transport expert in the UK. They're actually doing another follow-up version of this book. It just talks about how slowing down might not be a bad thing. And I know many of you will have had these experiences that I have when I'm cycling, I see people, I stop and talk to people, things I can't do. I don't get those benefits when I'm in a car. You can't just, well, you can just stop, but it tends to be a little bit dangerous. And you stop, you see things, you interact with your environment, and all those kind of benefits, which are really difficult to quantify. What is the benefit of me? Well, we know that some benefit of me being exposed to green space, but what is the benefit of me cycling along, seeing Glenn, who I know, pulling over and having a chat that I wouldn't have had otherwise? It's very difficult to put a value, but I think actually those benefits are really important. And yet we're kind of obsessed with faster, etc., etc. I kind of think sometimes that the current government's mantra is grow, grow, grow. And I think in the context of transport, the only thing we're growing are waistlines, road crashes, and greenhouse gas emissions. And if you want to, which aren't great things. And I want to talk a little bit on climate change. What's interesting, and I'm just pulling this out of the paperwork for the speed rule. So if you look in the speed rule, because of the outcomes framework, they have to address each of the outcomes in there. And so they have to address environmental sustainability. And I thought this would be interesting. I wonder what they're going to talk about climate change. It's going to increase them. What about air pollution? How many people is it? 2,000 people a year, whatever, die from air pollution in this country. Surely they'll say it always, speed limits going up, increases emissions, it induces demand, etc., etc. Pollution goes up. This is what it said. The emissions trading scheme is the government's key tool to reduce emissions. All emissions from the transport sector must be offset through the purchase of emissions units needed. Nothing else. And to me, what that's saying really, really clearly is, in the context of transport, the emissions trading scheme is it. And they ignore nitrogen dioxide, particulate matter, carbon monoxide, all those other things that are killing 2,000 people a year. So the emissions trading scheme is it. I'm not an expert on the emissions trading scheme, but the emissions trading scheme component of a litre of fuel is tiny. To make any difference on people's behaviour, you have to put it up a lot, and we already know there is no political appetite for putting the price of fuel up. So the emissions trading scheme is going to do, I don't think it's going to do anything for transport. Because I don't think politically anyone would ever like whatever countenance the amount it would have to go up to actually have any impact. I'm not an expert on the emissions trading scheme, and if someone can tell me I'm missing something, please do, but I don't think it's going to do it.
You're quite right.
So if we look at electric vehicles, because the previous government was big into incentivising the uptake of electric vehicles, this is our total vehicle fleet in New Zealand. The electric bit's right at the bottom. Basically it's petrol and diesel, the total vehicles is the black line at the top. So this is electric vehicles right down here. This is hybrids and stuff. Pretty small. In other words, if we want to electrify the fleet, we need to do something really fast. Unless we're writing it off and saying we're not interested. At the moment, it seems to be that we're not particularly interested, but if we are, we've got to do something pretty quick. If we look at electric vehicles, this is new to New Zealand, so this is new vehicles coming in each month. Battery electric is this light blue one, going up, going up, going up, got to here, got to about 20% of new vehicles at the end of 2024 were electric, and it was on a good trajectory. And there were a lot of incentives to do that. So there was the clean car discounts, clean car standard, you didn't pay road user charges or fuel excise duties, so there were some incentives. This is what's happened since. So we've gone from 20% down to here, basically nothing. Now the government, when they came in, said we know it'll drop because we're cutting the clean car discount, but it will pick itself up. Not happening yet, is it? I know you can't see, I know, we know that it's really going up over here, right? Off the screen. No, it's not. It's really, really low. So we may be looking like we're accepting that electric vehicles aren't the solution. And we know that people have said the end of the clean car discount, road user charges, etc., seeing EV sales decline. So those incentives were encouraging people. And there was other things that the government had quietly, without people knowing, defunded transport plan away. There's lots of other little things. So for instance, did you know if you have an electric vehicle, your ACC fees have doubled? And they probably, if you think we should treat everybody the same, it makes sense. But if you think we're trying to incentivise people to get electric vehicles, it's kind of another kick in their teeth to an electric vehicle, or people who might be about to buy an electric vehicle. The one thing the government was positive about in terms of electric vehicles, so this is from their electric manifesto, they said we're going to have 10,000 new electric vehicle chargers in 4 years. So 4 years we're going to have 10,000 electric chargers all around the country. Has anyone else got an electric vehicle here? Yeah. I don't know about you, but I went travelling this summer. Getting to the West Coast was really difficult. Reefton, there's a tiny charge. I spent 3 hours in Reefton waiting to charge my car, which is fine. I quite enjoyed 3 hours in Reefton, but it's not great, you know. And then it's really difficult getting down the West Coast because there's basically nothing around Hearts at the moment. So there's some problems. Definitely, if we want to encourage electric vehicles, we need more chargers. The problem is that they've kind of not delivered that. They've extended the time out, not from 4 years to, I think, 8 years or something like that. And they're so far behind, and they've cut the money that was already there. So the previous government had already allocated a certain amount of money towards developing, putting more charges in, the current lot cut it. So while that was their kind of one promise, they're not really delivering on that promise. And they're certainly not going to be delivering 10,000 charges in 4 years. I think the next target is 10,000 by 2030 maybe, but I think they're not looking good for that. The other thing is research tells us that, some research out of Oxford University, so I think they're a reasonable university, we should be able to trust them, said that cycling is really good. It's actually better than electric vehicles in terms of, as a way of reducing our emissions, and obviously that's not a priority, so that's another thing that's gone. I'm near the end now, and I'm going to tell you a funny story. I went to a conference earlier this year for the Intelligent Transport System, and they wanted me to talk about New Zealand and what was happening in emissions and transport, various things. And I thought I'd put this up. I found this thing about, and it was really about greenwashing by the transport industry in terms of their green credentials. And I was just saying, we've got to be careful about who we believe about some of this stuff, because they're saying certain things. We've just got to challenge them and keep them honest. And I showed these two pictures, and these are billboards in the UK where people have put these spoof adverts up. So one is Toyota, it's a banned fossil fuel ad, and about all the emissions, and there's another one from Toyota. They both happen to be from Toyota. Now, I was on a panel. What I didn't realise was the head of Toyota in Indonesia was on the same panel. So I just put this up, and there we are on the panel. Here he is, the smiling chap at the end. This guy is amazing. He's one of our ex-PhD students. He's heading up transporting the build of the new capital city in Indonesia. So he's amazing. That guy's done amazing things, and he studied in Christchurch. So someone we should be very proud of. His name's William Sabanda, a very cool guy. But this guy, not so happy. My final thing just to mention is you might have seen this headline that the New Zealand road lobby's tobacco industry-like tactics are being revealed in a study. This is the publication, so you can have a look at that. And it basically says what sort of tactics are the road lobby using, and it basically says it's very like the tobacco lobby. It comes up with 4 main points. It says the transport sector should be considered a commercial determinant of health. The road lobby groups in New Zealand advocate for policy that sustains car dependence. Having strategies used by the road lobby share similarities with other unhealthy industries, and transport policymakers must be alert to the influence of commercial vested interests. So it basically said, look, there are groups who genuinely are wanting the status quo. They want us to keep using fossil fuel-powered cars, etc., etc. And we need to kind of acknowledge that. And I think a lot of people have thought that, and this is some really good research by people at the University of Otago saying, look, it is happening. Let's not pretend it isn't. And let's not pretend the road lobby group isn't in existence, because it kind of is. So that's where I want to end. I'm very happy to have answer any questions, and that's it. I'm going to sit with
Right. I'll waddle up the front.
Waddle, waddle.
Waddle, waddle. Right, questions?
Thank you very much, Simon. That was fascinating. A quick comment and then a question. The first point is, when are you going to leave academia and go into politics so we can vote for you as Minister of Transport?
that is never going to happen.
Since you're not Chief Science Advisor, we can't blame you for all these traffic issues now. And while I was slightly happy to hear that Chris Bishop may be marginally better than Simeon Brown in the transport situation, I don't hold too much hope with the current lot. My question relates to Norway, and it's not about electric vehicles, it's about the road toll. Because they're a country with a similar population, a lot of conditions are similar. Yeah, they are richer, they can engineer their roads better, but their road toll is, in recent years, has been about a third of New Zealand's road toll. And I just think that we could do much, much better. And we're losing a life a day, basically, and have been. And I don't know if it's possible, or if there's been any modelling, or if it's possible to comment on what these new speed limit increases, what the implications on the road toll is, and if there's any hope, that we might start actually getting that number down, and if anybody's paying attention to it these days.
I think there's 16 questions there.
I know. And no, I won't be a politician. Will I pick that one?
Yeah.
I mean, Norway is the one everyone looks to, and I mean, one of the Simeon Brown said, well, we're having a default speed limits of 50 because Norway does. Norway doesn't. So all the countries he said, he's just making it sadly. He said what they have is they allow many of their cities to lower speed limits to 30, and vast parts of their cities. So I think he quotes Japan, Norway, Denmark, and somewhere else. And nearly all those countries make it very easy to have low speed limits. So that's a big part of what they do. They do spend more. I mean, I'm not an expert on this. Glenn might know what they do in terms of engineering, but they're fairly well down in the south part of their country. It's pretty inhospitable parts of the country, so lots of things we could learn. We do have a culture problem, I think. We do. I mean, I alluded to this earlier. I think we seem to have this thing about driving fast and cars. And it's really hard to get around because that's what the politicians kind of listen to. So we need to have low speed limits as one. We need to engineer our roads, but we need appropriate speed limits. And actually, sometimes we could make every single one of our state highways suitable for going 120k, but it would cost an absolute fortune. It's much cheaper just to have low speed limits. It's a really cheap solution. a few potholes and low speed limits. That's what they do.
Well, I understand Norway has
Hang
a
on.
0 alcohol limit, 80 speed limit on the open road.
That's enough.
And
Thank you.
just final thing,
No.
they check
No,
your speed
no,
limit
no.
every 20 kilometres with
No.
cameras.
Good boy.
Good segue on culture.
Yeah.
5 years ago, I've got 2 fossil fuel cars, but I had in my mind the next car needs to be electric, kind of to fit into society.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious. I have a perception that culture's changed now. Now it's woke to want an electric vehicle. You said we wanted one from Musk. Am I right in my perception? And what's the mechanics of trying to change that culture?
Really good question. I think it was changing. We can see the numbers going up. 20% of new vehicles were electric, and that was with some incentives. But you're right, it has become woke. Elon Musk hasn't helped. Because you're right. I think a lot of people would say there's no way I'm touching a Tesla. I've got a Leaf. I've got an oldest Leaf, but it's fantastic. And I would never go back to petrol now. We literally go around the whole country. It just makes you stop. So I drove back from Wanaka a couple of weeks ago. I just had to stop twice for 20 minutes, which actually is a really good thing for my health, because it's good to stop every 2 or 3 hours. So it does take leadership, and unfortunately, at the moment, the leadership is saying electric cars are bad somehow. It's kind of in this thing about fast and driving. You've just got to keep persevering, I think.
Just a story that last Thursday night in the bar here, a Tesla owner was wandering around seeing if anyone had any name badges of old cars he could take as Tesla. I thought Morris Commercial would be quite.
Yeah.
So anyway, we'll take his picture and send it to you. We'll have the medical officer account.
I'm really interested in simplifying the arguments about speed. And it goes like this for me, is that it's not the cause of the accident that matters when you're about to have it. Okay, whether it's drugs, alcohol, poor bends in the road, or going too fast. It's how fast you're going when you actually hit something.
Mm-hmm.
That's what kills people, and it's the square of the speed that kills people. So if everyone just went slower, there'd be less injuries and less fatalities. And we get diverted into these arguing about, let's take a road and nicer bends. Apart from that one tactic, which is simplifying, which I would recommend, we simplify the argument and say it's the speed you're going when you hit someone that kills you, not what caused it to happen. What else? What other tactics can you come up with to make it clear to politicians, our local MPs, that if they're supporting this, they are supporting more road deaths and catastrophic injuries?
I know, it'll be interesting to see in the next year if, I assume people will find the case of someone who died on a road where the speed limit went up. And I think Simeon Brown should be challenged on that.
Yes.
I think we just had one in Wairarapa.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Did they?
The section that they just put up, I'm pretty sure there was a death just the other day.
Excellent.
Should be challenged on that.
Really.
Jan.
I'm going to break the rule and make a comment, but you can tell me what you think of my comment.
Just
Treat
to
it as a
explain
question.
that Jan used to be Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment.
But before that, for a while, I was the chair of Land Transport New Zealand, and so I'm very familiar with all of this. It seemed to me over time that a big problem that we have in this country is the way the funding of state highways works. So state highways are 100% funded by central government. So in my position as chair, I was constantly lobbied by every councillor in the country. All they wanted was another state highway or an improvement to an existing state highway. They weren't interested in the local roads, they were interested in that. And so there's that constant pressure to provide more and more state highways. And so if you consider the motorway system in Auckland, where most of the traffic on it is local, it's not state highways joining up, cities or ports and so on. It's hopping on and hopping off.
Yeah.
If Auckland Council had to spend, even 5% of the cost of these hugely expensive motorways, that would have given them pause.
Yeah.
And I think if we hadn't had that, and I think that funding situation lies at the bottom of where we are, and it just goes on creating that year after year.
And Jen, I was on the regional
So that's,
transport.
do you agree with me?
I agree. I was on the regional transport committee here for about a decade, and I would sit in meetings where the central government, which was national at the time, would say, you can have 100 million for state highways, or not.
Yeah.
And you had no choice, and you couldn't say, well, we'd like 30 million for cycleways, please. We'd like 50 million for our local roads. you didn't have that. Now, I had a conversation when Phil Twyford was Minister, and he said, and I wish he'd pursued this one, and I wish I'd encouraged him at the time, he said, I think we need to change the model. He said, because at the moment we say there's $1 billion for state highways, and there's $2.50 for cycleways, and there's $1.70 for walking and cycling, or walking, and there's whatever. He said, why would we be better saying regionally, you can have 100 million, what do you want to do with it?
Yeah.
And that's what I think you're saying, is if we completely change the funding model, rather than saying you can have all this money for state highways and nothing else, you actually say, what do you want to fulfil, meet the needs of
But the
your...
building of any road should have a percentage of
Yeah.
coming from
Like
councils.
But
And so
one-
that would make them really think about whether they want
No.
to do it or not.
And the counter to that, and I think what someone in Waimate or somebody in Mackenzie would say is we can't afford it. So I think the reason government does it is because of the rural councils. So Mackenzie, for instance, has about 8,000 ratepayers, and most of the people driving on their roads are tourists.
But you could make an exception.
Yes, you could,
That's not-
but I think that's part of the driver. But I agree with
It's
you.
just the way it's always been done.
It's the way it's always been done, yeah. So,
Simon, you started off talking about funding what people want in the road
Can
system.
everyone hear Chris?
No.
Oh, stand up.
You can repeat the question.
I guess I'll repeat the question. You started your talk really projecting planning as building on what we've got already.
yeah.
And my question to you is, are we on the cusp of a paradigm shift? You just about told one then, you answer then. Because you know, if you are in a car, I was test driving an MG3 hybrid plus the other day. I was going to trade my Leaf in for it. And I found out how my Leaf was only worth that much. So we're not going ahead with that. But the point of it, in that car, it kept telling me if I was going over the speed limit. It gave me cues. We could, if you want to fund it, if you go over the speed limit, it's automatically deducting from your account and the money.
And one of the things that so the idea is that you basically have something in your car that tells you when you're speeding and you directly fine people almost. One of the things we were talking about a few years ago, so the government has signalled they're going to move from fuel excise duty to road user charges. I don't know I think it was a little bit mischievous because that work had been happening in the ministry for 5 years. And Simeon Brown implied it was his idea. That's not his idea, that's work that's been talked about. It's inevitable we have to do it. What I was saying with some colleagues 5 years ago when I was in the ministry is, why don't we from today insist everybody has a GPS box in their car? So every car in New Zealand has a GPS box. Because if you go to road user charges, the easy way is to have a box in your car and it would allow you to do that. And it was like, if we did it from then, every car that comes in, so we'd have had 5 years of cars with a box, and it could be sitting there doing virtually nothing. And when you buy a new car, new to New Zealand, the e-roads people say we could probably get it down to about $50 or $100. And so it wouldn't be, because they'd be selling millions of them, right? And then, if you now implemented road user charges, you could actually do it for all those, and you'd have to work out a clever way for people who've already got their cars, not insurmountable. The longer we delay insisting on that, the further we are away from what you're talking about. Because it's not difficult, the technology's there, it is a little bit Big Brother watching you, but they're not watching you, they're watching your vehicle. So.
Hi Simon, you mentioned earlier about ministers like Simeon Brown not understanding induced
Can
demand.
everyone hear?
Speak up.
Yeah.
Do you think that's actually true? Do you think they do understand it, but there's just a lot of money to be made by people driving cars, hence the lobby groups?
Yeah. Good question. Does Simeon Brown understand induced demand? First of all, I think Chris Bishop does. And Chris Bishop, from some of the stuff he's been saying in the last 2 weeks, understands the relationship between transport and land use planning. With Simeon, a couple of times, he was once interviewed by Jack Tame before the election when he was transport spokesman, and he gave an answer which made me think he might not understand induced demand. And I thought, does he actually get it? So I'm not sure. I'm almost giving him the benefit of the doubt that he's a bit fake. Right, I shouldn't say that one. As against he's being mischievous and naughty. Simeon, Chris Bishop does get it, and that's what encourages me about Chris Bishop. He understands the relationship between transport and land use. Could be. Yeah. I hope they're not. I hope they just don't know. the opposite.
Right. Down back there. Please. Oh, sorry.
Me? Yeah.
Speak up.
So a comment on the previous question about
Can everyone hear?
speed limiters.
Yeah.
That was tried in the 1920s, and I think it was Massachusetts, and they could have done it.
Yeah.
But there was a targeted campaign from the car lobby with ads and lobbying councillors, so it didn't go through.
Yeah.
So we could have done it for a long time. Then the question is, if there isn't the political will to use the stick, so we can't price using a car adequately to reduce it, and if the carrot is working, but it's not working fast enough, what else can we do? The carrot being cycleways and
Change the government.
It is currently it's difficult. It's almost like they almost don't seem to be bothered about it. In terms of emissions, for instance, it's very much the emissions trading scheme that's going to sort it out. In terms of other things, we don't. We go to the gym if we care about health and well-being. We go to the gym. I mean, it's a bit naive. In terms of the stick, what was your point about the stick? Remind me again.
well, just about changing the mode share.
Yeah.
If we're already doing the carrot, it's working a little bit, but not fast enough.
Yeah, charging.
And we're not wanting to do the stick.
So one thing, just on the point about charging, I think you mentioned about charging people. One is, of course, they are talking about tolling roads. Now, I've got nothing against tolling roads. First of all, there are some things you have to be really careful about. You have to make sure that you're not tolling people. Like, if you're in Auckland and you're going to toll people to drive into Auckland, you've got to be careful. What do you do when you start tolling the person on the minimum wage who's going to be in the office in the morning? You've got to be really careful about equity. I think the government has said we are going ahead with tolling. I think it'll be really interesting when they actually have to press the button to do the first bit of tolling, because it will not be popular. So tolling is a good idea, or charging people in congestion, but it will not be popular when it kicks off, or people have to start paying them.
Thank you. On Simeon Brown, I think it wasn't so much he didn't understand, he just wasn't interested in understanding. And my perception was that the main problem was that he was in his own echo chamber of guys who like to go fast and businesses who want to make money out of vehicles and making roads and all the rest of it. And quite often, both from him and from a couple of other national MPs, might have been Luxembourg, saying, no one comes to me about that, So the people that are coming to them are the ones who are saying the things that they are wanting to hear, and then they parrot. And so part of our job, I think, is writing letters to such people saying, giving them an alternative. Because if they're not, they're discounting the public service as giving them unfair, clear advice or what, but they're listening to particular lobby groups all the time.
What campaign, on the end of that, what campaigns are happening to actually challenge the government decision?
It's difficult in terms of campaigns, but I do think one of the things that's happening with the speed limits is that some national heartland constituencies are saying we do not want to raise speed limits. So when the mayor of Nelson, in Nelson City, he's an ex-national cabinet minister, Nick Smith is saying we don't want to raise our speed limits.
And Rakaya or Ashburn said the same.
James Meagher is the MP down there. He is Associate Minister of Transport. His own local councillor saying we don't want to raise them. So that will be really interesting to see what happens, because that's national areas saying we don't want to do this.
Right, last question back there.
Thanks, Dan.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, in urban area, cycle can be used for autonomy and car. But in terms of national development and economy, and also like when people need to travel long distance, what is the future in New Zealand? I mean, the public transport, it requires years and quite sophisticated investment.
So in terms of long distance travel, so you're saying cycling is good in short distances and locally, and it's great in cities like Christchurch. We've got amazing cycle ways. And then they're starting to be really impactful in lots of other cities, so Wellington's still doing good stuff, and Auckland and others. In terms of longer distance travel, I think the first thing you want to try and do is make it, you need to design your cities so that people don't have to travel long distances. So you hear about things like the 15-minute city. We want to design that. We need to get over the silliness about people misunderstanding what that is. So that's a messaging thing. So we need to encourage that. Then there's things like rail, and one of the most interesting proposals that was only very slightly discussed is an idea of an overnight train from Wellington to Auckland.
Yeah.
Now, the people who did the business case say it would cost. They could make it the same cost as flying, and the idea is that if you make every government person do it on their journey, the night before, so you get on the train in the evening, you go overnight, either Wellington or Auckland, whichever way you're going. You do your day's work and you fly home. And if every government person did that, you'd actually have. My understanding is it doesn't need to be fast. In fact, it doesn't want to be fast. You want it to take about 10 hours. So there's a really good example where slow is better. And logistically, I think people have done the work and it's possible, but no one seems interested in it. Rail just seems to be off the agenda. But I think the first thing is you make it so people don't need to travel such long distances as often. That's a starter. And then rail between our big cities probably is the answer. The problem is our infrastructure is so old, it's so antiquated that at some point it seems someone needs to invest a lot of money in it. And of course there are tens of billions of dollars, we're just investing in the wrong thing. There isn't a lack of money being invested in transport in this country. It's not about lack of money, we're just investing it in the wrong places.
Right.
So, thank you very much, Simon, and I think this is really just the start, and one of the things that we all have to do is be involved in campaigns to actually lobby ministers, lobbying, previous to joking, so is lobby the members of parliament and lobby local government. The local government, it's election year. And boy, one thing that politicians understand is somebody giving them a hard time about the topic. Take it from me. So Simon, I applaud your courage, I applaud your science, and keep it up.
Yeah.
We've had a number of hands up, but I'm sorry. We've
Get a costume now.
Let's see what size to put in Hamilton. And I'll go to meetings in Wellington.
What's the magic? Turn that on.